the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. Tuesday, January the 27th, is the International Holocaust Memorial Day. On that day, 70 years ago, the Allied Soviet Army liberated the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp in southern Germany. The sign that stands above the gates of Auschwitz with the cruel lie, "Work will make you free," is notorious in its own right and a potent symbol for the most horrendous crimes of the 20th century. Auschwitz was the scene of a systematic extermination of 1.1 million men, women, and children, most of whom were Jews, in the camp's gas chambers between 1940 and 1945. Because of what happened there, the term Jewish Holocaust came into the vocabulary, and the concept of genocide became a reality in international affairs and international law. A new exhibit, Unlocking the Gates of Auschwitz 70 years later, was developed by the Center for Holocaust and Humanity Education here in Cincinnati. The exhibit will open this Friday, January the 30th, at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. The exhibit features documents and artifacts and photographs from several collections at Hebrew Union College, but also features artifacts and photographs assembled by a local collector. I am joined this morning by Sarah Weiss, the director of the Center for Holocaust and Humanity Education, as well as the Jewish Community Relations Committee, and Stephen Cassidy, a local collector who made his artifacts and photographs available for display in the exhibit. Sarah, welcome back.
Thank you.
Stephen, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Sarah, first off, I think I should congratulate you. The last time you were on here about 2 months ago, you were talking about the need for the state of Ohio to pass legislation guaranteeing that students study European history, contemporary history, so that the Holocaust could be studied. That law passed.
That passed, and I thank you for sharing that, and I think
Newsmakers definitely was the tipping point.
For sure.
So, no, in all seriousness, it was. This is an exhibit that, you know, could have been done a lot of times. Why now?
So as we mark 70 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, you know, the survivors are passing away at an unprecedented level. Here in Cincinnati, we're fortunate still to have many survivors with us, but unfortunately, again, the numbers are going down rapidly. But this came together in an incredible way. We have the incredible collection of Stephen Cassidy, who's been a collector for over 30 years, coupled with the stories of local survivors, and to really humanize this history.
And that power of the artifact and the personal story is something that's driven all of your exhibits and all of your programs at the center for whatever number of years. How many years have you been around?
10 years.
10 years. So that's the really powerful combination. Stephen, how did you start collecting on this topic?
It was really unintentional. My parents were antique collectors. As a child, I grew up going to antique shows.
Did you grow up locally?
Yeah, I grew up in Middletown,
okay.
Ohio. My father, Frederick, worked at the steel factory up there, but his side thing was antiques. I just saw artifacts from the Holocaust as a child, and I had an interest in the human side of it more than the, you know, Army stories, World War II.
So when we talk about a collection, how would you describe your collection?
I've really tried to focus on telling the overall story of the Holocaust. I look across items, you know, you take what's the universe gives to you, but I've tried to focus on telling all aspects of it, from the propaganda side to the genocide, slave labor, the exploitation.
Let's, for example, you just mentioned propaganda.
Yeah.
One of the things you shared with me, and that is in the exhibit, is some propaganda materials that were put out by the Nazis. We'll bring that up. And, you know, when you see some of this, here you can see some.
Yeah.
You know, when you see these, what do you see?
It's still shocking and amazing to me that a Western civilized nation at any point in history would put this sort of thing out. These books are a series of children's readers. They were actually, the one is even a coloring book. They were focused towards children.
And a teacher's guide.
And a teacher's guide on how to teach anti-Semitism in schools.
So
it's just amazing.
It is systematic from early childhood on. It wasn't just something that occasionally was, it wasn't an occasional anti-Semitic statement.
No.
It was a systematic. There's another thing that you shared with us. There is a sign that was inside a train that I'd like to bring up because it's focused directly on Auschwitz. Is that right?
Yes, that sign would have gone on a shuttle train that ran between Westerbork concentration camp, transit camp in Amsterdam in Holland, to Auschwitz. Quick interesting story on that. The SS and the German army would get in debates over who should have access to trains. The war was on. And the SS was actually given an allotment of trains, and they were designated for that purpose. It was that priority.
And the point here is with Auschwitz, people were being shipped from all over Europe into this camp.
Correct, all over, and that's part of the two survivors that are really focused on in the exhibit. One comes from the perspective of Germany, the other from Greece, and really Auschwitz is synonymous with the Holocaust, and we have this image of what it was, but it was even more than what we understand and can possibly grasp. I mean, over 50 square miles, 30 subcamps. It's a universe all its own. And so by taking the incredible collection of Stephen and the survivors and the artifacts in our collection and those from the American Jewish Archives and other places, we're really telling the history in a new way, but hoping to really call people and challenge people of what we've learned and what do we still need to do.
Well, we have a little bit of footage from inside of the exhibit itself as what people will experience at the Freedom Center. What is your goal in doing this? As you design this exhibit, I mean, every exhibit designer or curator knows what they're trying to get at.
Well, let me say this, and then I'll answer the question, is that this came together through the center in partnership with Stephen, in partnership with the Cincinnati Museum Center and the Freedom Center, which is very unique how this came together collaboratively. So a lot of people were thinking through this and feeling it and learning about it in a new way. But really, again, our goal is to challenge people to think of 70 years later, what do we know, what do we still need to know, and what can we learn from this?
Stephen, you've been thinking about this, collecting around this for a long time. What do you think we need to know?
I couldn't have put it better. Sarah really hit the nail on the head. That's been my feelings from day one. I've, for over 20 years, spoken to local schools and colleges and anyone who would listen to hear the message that Sarah just
As you look at what's happening in Europe, in the United States, in our world today, what, in light of, sort of through the lens of Auschwitz and the exhibit, and I'll start with Stephen, because you think about this professionally. What are you thinking about what's going on today?
That racism, discrimination, bigotry of any type just needs to be stopped. We need to be rid of it once and for all and get along, live together. Learn from this.
I think lots of people, I would hope everybody, but let's face it, it's not true. Lots of people would say just what Stephen said. How do you do it, though? How do you systematically put something in place in a society that begins to address that sort of thing?
Boy, if I had the answer, I would change the world. But I think it starts with education, and not just education like we're doing, sharing information and sharing history. I think sharing history is important. We have to understand history in order to move forward, but I also think it's about getting to meet people beside ourselves and who we are, breaking down the barriers that exist, whether it's in our city, nationally, internationally. You know, as I look around, I think, you know, there are still issues of injustice and groups and minorities that are still struggling for freedoms, basic freedoms in our own country. And then as I look to Europe and elsewhere in the world, as you were saying,
France in the last 3 weeks.
Germany, Belgium, I mean, the rise of anti-Semitism is so alarming. Anti-Semitism, the anti-immigrant sentiment, this idea of the fear of the other that is permeating Europe is very real and very scary.
You said you started as a child.
Yeah.
What do you think it was, though? I mean, you now have hindsight. Why did this? I mean, in one sense, it's horrible.
Yeah.
You know, and you could get fascinated by the evil, but it doesn't sound like what you were fascinated.
Not
so why is that? Was it your parents who helped you see these things in a different way?
A lot of it. My father had an interest in the military antiques. He was 8 years old at the end of World War II, and you know every little boy wants to play cowboys and army. So he would look at things and was interested in things and would tell me about the war, and I would see you know the propaganda, and they were visually I'd never seen anything like that.
Incredibly sophisticated.
Yeah, it really was, and I would ask my dad about it, and he would explain it to me, you know, age appropriately. But
right.
I just found that interesting that I didn't understand why someone would make such a concerted effort to hate someone. I didn't get that. I wanted to understand it better.
And I think we need to be clear, and this is going to come up a bit in the second part of the show.
Right.
It wasn't that this was Hitler's issue.
Right.
This was Western civilization, and the United States was part of this too.
Correct.
I mean, this view of the place of Jews in Western society.
Right, and I mean, we know that at first the doors in Germany were open, and as your next segment will show, but basically the world closed its borders, and so this is a part of history that belongs to all of us.
You were saying that there are two survivors that are sort of focused on. How are they manifested in the exhibit? How do their stories come through?
So throughout the exhibit, what little artifacts or photographs, one of them only has one photograph from before the war, but these kinds of things are displayed. Also, their video testimonies are displayed at certain poignant points in the exhibit, pivotal moments in their experiences of Auschwitz. Another artifact that's incredible is when Werner Koppel escaped the death march just before the liberation of Auschwitz. As he was marched away from Auschwitz, he ran away, and he had his uniform on, and in his pocket he had Auschwitz money, which was good for basically nothing.
Right.
But he had that money in his
Work
pocket.
will make you free.
That's right.
Yeah.
He had that money in his pocket and kept it all those years, and that will be on display. So their stories are woven throughout.
And I know that an artifact that has always struck me in your basic exhibit at the center was a potato peeler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That I forget whose it was.
Henry Blumenstein. Yeah.
And he saved that because it reminded him of the work that he did.
Yeah.
And it's those little things, it's those personal things that you've been collecting that really tell these stories and the oral histories.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for collaborating, working together. Thank you for saving all those materials, because otherwise we couldn't tell this story.
And really, one last note, I feel it my responsibility and my duty to tell their story.
And you're doing a good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to view the exhibit, it opens this Friday, January the 30th, at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. The center is on the Banks in downtown Cincinnati, and the exhibit is on the third floor next to the invisible slavery exhibit that we were talking about last week here on Newsmakers. Stay tuned. After the break, I'll be joined for another part of this International Holocaust Remembrance Day story. Thank you very much. Welcome back. As the Nazi threat grew in Europe, Jews dispersed around the world searched for ways to save as many as possible. In most cases, governments, including the United States, pursued policies that showed little interest or even open hostility to rescuing these people. But Jews and Jewish organizations and a few sympathizers persisted and in some cases were successful. Here in Cincinnati, the home of the reform movement, the leaders of Hebrew Union College tirelessly worked to save scholars and students trapped in Hitler's Europe. They were successful in 16 cases. This afternoon, to mark the 140th anniversary of HUC and the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, a special program at the college will tell the story of the efforts to save 11 professors and 3 students. I am joined this morning by 2 graduate students at Hebrew Union College who have been researching this effort. Eva
Mwanika.
Mwanika, even though I practiced, I messed it up. Sorry about that.
That was good enough.
Is pursuing her PhD in Judaic Studies and Ancient Near East Studies at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. And Kurt Backlund is a doctoral student in the Hebrew Bible and Ancient Near East Studies. Together, Eva and Kurt have been systematically researching the documents at the American Jewish Archives on the Clifton campus about this whole effort to free and bring Jewish scholars to the United States and save them from Hitler. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thanks for having us.
So obviously this is related to the 140th anniversary of the college, but how did you get focused? Did somebody come up and say, we'd like you to work on this, or did you say, I hear this might be a possibility and I'd like to pursue it?
We were actually approached to work on the project.
I've been a graduate student. I had a suspicion that's the way it was.
Yeah, that's how it worked out. But in the process of it, I found overlaps with my own research.
And how would you describe the documentation about these efforts? Is it substantial? Did you have a lot to work with? Was it minuscule? What did you have?
Well, most of our research, we did it at the American Jewish Archives, which is located at the Cincinnati campus, and they're just boxes with hundreds and hundreds of correspondence between the then president, Julian Morgenstern, and the American consulate in DC, Berlin, London, Dublin, and also with him just going back and forth with these refugee scholars and their immediate families. And so there are tons of documents for anyone interested.
Which is the wonderful situation for a historian, right?
Exactly.
To have lots of documents.
Yeah.
I want to bring up an image of President Morgenstern, but Kurt, how would you describe him? What kind of person did you discover him to be as you read these letters?
He seemed like a very driven and almost relentless individual, very compassionate as well. He wrote back and forth with Jewish leaders in several different schools in Europe, picking out the different individuals he wanted to bring back. He was talking with lawyers, with the State Department, as Ava said, and then all the personal correspondence that went into it.
And what was the general reaction of the American government at whatever level he was dealing with at any one moment? How much sympathy, active participation, resistance? How would you describe the American government's attitude towards this?
In a word, probably apathy. And I don't think there was necessarily too much malice in the different restrictions that they changed and imposed throughout the war years. But things were always changing, and they never made anything easy for anybody that wanted to come over. You had to try things, figure out how it worked. Oftentimes people would be sending letters, sending applications, be rejected for some reason that they had no idea existed, or something that had just changed in the past few months, and they had to go back and start over.
There's these 11 professors, the scholars, who were able to be brought over. One of the problems was, as I read the material I could get to, was that frequently Hebrew Union College didn't have courses or an area of specialty that they were a specialist in, and therefore the government was able to say, well, what do you want them for? I mean, you're not teaching that. That was one of the issues, right?
Yeah, that was one of the issues, but when you think about it, it's really a remarkable episode in history. You know, it was an instance of foresight by the president. This was in the year 1934, 1935. At this point, no one thought the Holocaust was going to happen.
Right, you can't see forward.
You can't see forward, and so because of just having him and the team around him having a very clear objective, a very clear sense of the situation and, you know, ownership of the agency of the situation, they were able to bring in these scholars. And what you've just said, the specific language of the immigration laws, for example, disqualifying some of the students because of the fact that they were coming in from institutions which actually were universities, but because of the Nazi regime, they were demoted to a level that was not university level. And so one of the immigration acts of 1924 required for them to come to a school of equal rank. And so that created a problem with
that's interesting. I hadn't picked that up.
Yeah, with the consulates. And so these professors were working at universities, but because of the name change, they weren't allowed in because they were not qualified. And so that created a lot of delays and hurdles they had to tackle.
We could go into the story of a lot of these, and
yes.
you'll be talking about this afternoon. This is airing on Sunday morning, this afternoon.
Yes.
But I don't want to get. But one of the people that was brought over was somebody who really emerges, Abraham Heschel.
Mm-hmm.
Kurt, who is he, and who was he when he came over? And we'll talk about who he became in America.
When he came over, he was actually a very young scholar. I think he'd been teaching for a short time, possibly just 1 year, and he was one of the individuals who got caught in these immigration restriction loopholes. He'd applied for a visa, and the school where he had been teaching had been demoted in status by the Nazis, and the U.S. government required you to have a certain number of years teaching before they would let you come over on a visa as a professor. And so because of the changes and maybe his youth, he didn't meet all the requirements. He had to stay in Europe for another year or two before he was able to come out to Hebrew Union College.
And I'm aware of time, so I want to move forward and talk about who he becomes as a citizen of the United States. He really becomes known by lots of people,
yes.
including people like me who are old enough to have been part of the civil rights movement. What's his role in the civil rights movement? And we have a couple of photographs with him and Dr. Martin Luther King.
So to understand, when you look at this iconic picture with him marching, actually that's an image from the Selma marches, you know, with the new movie that just came out. And to understand that, you have to understand why he was passionate about social injustice, because he had lived through that. He was evicted out of Germany because of him being an alien Jew, ended up in Poland, and through this project by Julian Morgenstern, ended up in the U.S., and he became very interested in the civil rights movements. And they met at a religion and race conference. So these are things that are really passionate for him. And to understand the story, you really have to look at the rescue story behind the man. And so you look at it and you see a political moment and a religious moment in the image. So it's really interesting.
And they became very close.
They became very close. He gave a eulogy at his funeral, actually.
One thing I found that he said about Dr. King was, through Dr. King's life, he got a glimpse of the glory of God in the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. So here's a person sort of forged in the crucible of the 1930s Hitler's Europe, and comes and sees America in a different way. That's pretty amazing. What's the takeaway for you, Kurt? Let's begin with you, about having done these studies.
For me personally, there's an importance, because out of these individuals who came over, as you said, the school at the time was just a rabbinic school, and they didn't necessarily have the place for all of these scholars. So out of this sudden abundance of people, they began to talk about the idea, and they started the School of Graduate Studies, which opened the door for non-Jewish individuals to come and pursue graduate degrees. We wouldn't be there today if this hadn't happened. And yeah, just the reaching out to these people in a time where they didn't have the money to do it. The school didn't have the money. Most of the people in the United States were not working like this to save people. I think it's a challenge and an inspiration for us.
I want to make sure, I'm out of time, I want to make sure people know about the program this afternoon. If you'd like to learn more, as well as focus on contemporary issues, this afternoon, Hebrew Union College on the Clifton campus next to Good Samaritan Hospital, if you haven't been there before, is sponsoring a program entitled No Time for Silence. In addition to my guest, it will also feature United States Senator Sherrod Brown and Professor Susanna Heschel, who is the daughter of Rabbi Heschel, and one of the rescued scholars. The program begins at 4 o'clock. At 5:30, there'll be a candle lighting ceremony. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your work, and good luck in your future work, and what an inspiration for you as you move forward into the community. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, a special interview about the onset of serious mental illness and a new program to quickly deliver services to address the needs of sufferers. Have a good week.